Lives will be lost. That's a warning from New York City's first responders ahead of tomorrow's 5 p.m. deadline for all municipal workers to get at least one COVID vaccine shot. Officials are estimating that dozens of fire companies will have to close. 20% of ambulances will be taken off the streets and thousands of police officers sidelined. Here now, Vivek Ramaswamy, Woke Incorporated author. These are the people, Vivek, great to see you, who were on the job at the height of the pandemic, went to work, no questions asked, when we didn't even really know what was going on. And now they're being punished. And the city and cities across the country will be much less safe.
Look, Dagan, I think the core issue here is one of trust in our public leaders. And the interesting thing to me is that the majority of people who are refusing to get vaccinated for COVID-19 are already vaccinated voluntarily against a wide range of other diseases. And that should be a reason for public health leaders in this country to look themselves in the mirror and ask themselves why the public mistrusts their leadership so much when it comes to COVID-19. And I think the answer is crystal clear. Public health leaders in this country have lied repeatedly over the course of the last year and a half when it came to this pandemic and how to address it, such that they didn't trust the public with the facts in the first place. Now the public doesn't trust them in return. So I don't even think this is about the COVID-19 vaccine alone. I think this is about trust in our educated class, trust in scientific elites, trust in our public leaders, trust in the leaders of our institutions. And we are doing really poorly because the leaders of those institutions have given the public no reason to trust them. And I say that, Dagan, as somebody who is vaccinated, who wants to see more people vaccinated. I think it's a regret that we haven't trusted the public with the facts to allow them to come to their conclusion.
And some of it is natural immunity. That's one issue that's completely ignored. I had COVID in March, natural immunity. I went ahead and got vaccinated as soon as I possibly could. But we're replacing some of these leaders, and particularly the in health, in government. Say a Rochelle Walensky, who's clearly in the pocket of the teachers' unions, that she would come out and say children in school will be vaccinated but still forced to wear masks. That was just a head scratcher, and that was recently.
The irony is that I could not think of a worse way to build public trust in the vaccine or in the approaches to fight this pandemic than to enforce the kind of mandates that we are seeing. And it just really makes me think, Dagan, I know I don't like to be conspiratorial about these things, but if you really think about it, the Democratic Party actually likes it when people are refusing vaccines. So I think that if you think about the ways in which the lack of public trust amongst Republicans in many cases in the vaccine is working, it's actually working to the political advantage of the Democrats, which makes me think a lot about whether the Biden administration and the people in charge are really doing exactly what empowers them the most, which is the ability to not build public trust and force mandates that further distance the people who you supposedly want to see get vaccinated and then laugh at them and deride them when they don't. This is actually working, the one thing that may be working in their political favor. And I think we ought to think about what the motivations really are at issue here, because I think this has been a political game since day one. And I think we're seeing that politicization continue today by enforcing mandates or using the kinds of public communications that are actually eroding public trust at a time where we could actually use more of it with the public.
You are so spot on with that, because again, and it's still, you hear Joe Biden still talking about, and he's pitting the unvaccinated, well, the vaccinated against the unvaccinated, and talking about the unvaccinated as if you don't have, well, he actually said this, I'm paraphrasing, but you don't have a right to kill, the freedom to kill people. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah. Do you think that's going to convince anybody?
Right.
Do you think that's actually going to convince anybody? If you want to convince people, there are actually credible people on the right who are talking openly about the fact that they're vaccinated. Build trust in ways that actually share with the public, here's what we know and here's what we don't know, and be honest about it. That would actually bring more people along. So I'm actually becoming more cynical and wondering whether actually it's working to their advantage to further have a class of people that they can continue to deride, continue to laugh at, because it empowers themselves politically when everything else is going so wrong. That may be the one thing that they're latching onto, because I couldn't imagine a worse way to get more people alienated from trusting public science and public health officials in ways that the Biden administration is believing today. And I really think that's something we need to think about more on the right.
And these vaccine mandates for the police and fire, all the municipal workers, the calculation that these bureaucrats and these political leaders have made, say with the fire department and the police department, is It is much bigger safety risk to have, say, 20% of police officers stay on the job and be unvaccinated. That's a bigger risk than losing 20 or 30% of your cops on the beat. That's insanity.
Well, it's just another example of our failure over the last year to think about public health holistically, as opposed to just thinking about public health through the narrow prism of COVID-19. At the end of the day, the job of a public health official should be to provide advice on what improves public health overall, all things considered. We don't want people to die of COVID-19, but we don't want people to die of other health conditions that they haven't actually gone in to see their doctors for over the course of the last year and a half because of lockdowns and other failed policies for COVID-19, not to mention the mental health effects of it or the cardiometabolic effects of it of people not exercising and staying home and so forth. So it's just one more example of failing to actually our public health officials actually thinking about public health, the thing they're supposed to be thinking about, instead of actually using COVID-19 as a political opportunity to enforce a political agenda that, by the way, is actually, I think, working according to plan by creating a class of people that they can deride in order to empower themselves. And I think that's something that I would like to see the right wake up to, Dagan. I think that too many on the right are falling for that trick in a way that's empowering Joe Biden even further at a time where actually the public needs to see through that veneer for what it is.
Ramaswamy, excuse me. It's great to see you. Incredible insight always. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.